Hello and welcome back to Taking Back Saturday, a Happy Buyers Club podcast where we break down the real estate market each and every Friday to help home buyers build confidence, follow a process, and hopefully buy really happy. I'm your host, Chayse Jones, and joining me, as he does each and every week, fortnightly, occasionally, every other month, is my mate, Sam Hunter. How are you?
Good, man. 44 episodes and he doesn't need the notes anymore to do that intro.
I'm staring right down the barrel of this camera. That's how we go.
Yep.
44, it's all it took. Mate, this week we are going to cover off on something that probably is becoming more appropriate than ever. We speak to plenty of buyers each and every week who contact us asking for help, whether it's a lot of help or just a little bit of help. But a lot of those buyers are unit buyers.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly tricky market, you know.
Very competitive.
For sure. And it's a market that's continuing to grow and grow and grow. And it is probably something that has a lot of subtlety to it. Like there's actually quite a lot to unit buying, more than potentially for a house purchase, just with the added layers to that purchase. And
For sure.
The things that can come about with that purchase. What should buyers be looking out for with a unit purchase?
I think this is probably the most common question, aside from how do you know like a property is worth that you get. And actually
what should I be looking out for?
When we talk to potential clients about it, there's often a surprise that like we charge the same amount of money to buy a unit as we do a house. And that's often because it may be units sometimes are more expensive than houses, but in let's say 90% of cases, it is a lower price point, but it does come with more complexity, a little bit more to think about, and probably more competition, particularly in Brisbane. If you're buying under 700 grand and you are in the thick of everybody trying to save 25 grand in stamp duty by spending $699,999.99. The short answer is there's plenty to think about.
What should you be looking out for? Everything.
Yeah, there's plenty that you want to consider. And hopefully over the next 15 or 20 minutes, we can break down what are the most important things. Like what are the absolute non-negotiable questions to ask? What have you got to look out for in a disclosure statement? What do you want to get in addition to a disclosure statement? Because while that is what is required by law to buy and sell an apartment, townhouse, anything in a community title scheme, there's probably more paperwork that you want to have a look at before you make a decision to make an offer.
This is going to make one hell of a podcast talking about the amount of paperwork that people are potentially going to have to review for any particular potential
100%. And units, houses, residential, commercial property, the more boring that you can make your purchase decision, probably the better decision that you're going to make. Like real estate is only sexy if you're a shit real estate agent. It's just boring and consistent if you're a good buyer, a good seller, and a good real estate agent.
Boring equals fundamentally sound.
For sure.
That's the motto here.
Boring is sensible. And when you're spending $500,000 to $5 million, which is the apartment prices in Brisbane in the last 10 days, boring and sensible is probably better than fly off the cuff and hope for the best.
For sure. And, I think fundamentally, whether it's a house purchase, a townhouse purchase, or a unit purchase, starting at the same, building blocks that we always do about what is important to you. We can talk about, what our preferences are and what we recommend to our clients, but you need to really nut down what's important to you. Is it location? Is it the style of building? Is it the amenities that are in that building? Is it low body corporate costs? Is it just, keeping those overheads under control? Is it a healthy body corporate? Is it all of the above? But, there are lots of different types of units, and we talk to every kind of buyer out there, those that are looking to buy in a city in the big complexes and those that are looking to buy in a little niche 4-pack in the suburbs. And obviously with each of those comes different complexities as well. I know for us, the bigger complexes, it starts to, you need to probably, there's a little bit of an oversupply and it's not something that we typically go diving headfirst into unless location is the absolute priority. What is it about smaller complexes that we think are better purchases potentially for our buyers?
I think the smaller the complex, usually the more control over your destiny that you have. So if you're buying into a apartment block that was probably, if it's going to have a lot of units built in the last 20 years, chances are if you're one of anywhere from 25 to 150. There's going to be a pretty inactive committee on that body corporate. It's probably going to be run by a big corporation that has a high turnover of staff, and they're just looking to get their fees paid, and the rest kind of will take care of itself. If it's got an on-site manager, it's probably a little bit better managed. They tend to be the buildings that have somebody who has a vested interest in maintaining that building, in making sure that the residents of that building, be it owners or tenants, get along, that the right decisions are made at the right time, that money is spent appropriately. If there's not an on-site manager and there's, again, I'll just use the case of, let's say, 25 apartments and 50% renters, 50% owner-occupiers, and the building's 25 years old and you need a new roof, that can sometimes take a lot longer to happen than it should. And that can cause problems in terms of what was a pretty, I guess, standard fix might then turn into an emergency fix, which might add 30 or 40% to your cost because someone's like, hey, I can do that job because you need it. But it's going to cost you. You probably should have done it 18 months ago. What happened?
Did someone say special levy?
Yeah, here it comes. Voted that down. That's a bit weird. So yeah, I think the traditionally the smaller complex that you can buy into, and everybody in Brisbane thinks about boutique, to use the real estate language, complexes of being 6 or less. We'd be pretty happy to purchase for anybody in a complex of 10 or less. You get a pretty good mix of both good tenants and
active owners.
Yeah, active is the word I was looking for. And that's what you want to look for. And again, that's the one thing that a disclosure statement, and we'll talk about paperwork and everything in a bit, but a disclosure statement won't tell you how active that body corporate management team is and how active that body corporate committee, as in the people who care enough about where they live to lump into meetings a couple of times a year to make sure that
the roof does get fixed,
appropriate decisions are being made and money is being spent appropriately. So yeah, the smaller you get, you tend to have a more active committee, you tend to have a more active body corporate, you tend to have lower fees. Again, that's dependent on, you could buy a complex of 4 and it might have a 25-meter swimming pool and an elevator. So your fees are going to be pretty high. You might buy a complex of 10 and it's a 3-story walk-up with no pool. It was built in the 70s and the stairs are like concrete and never need to be maintained. You might have a very low body corporate. So it is going to be case dependent. This will be too general for some people listening and hopefully specific enough for others that they get some value from it. But yeah, we like 10 or less. It just tends to be a better experience for our clients, both in the short term, when you're moving in, you're meeting your neighbors, but in the long term as well, of if they ever want to trade up on that property, they tend to rent a little bit better as well. And they do tend to come with better cost control over the long term, which when you're buying into an apartment, yes, you're spending potentially less money getting into it, but costs can rack up on you very quickly because you can't make your own decision on the insurance. You're one of however many number of parties making that decision.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. If we are purchasing in a bigger complex, what I would typically advise, and something that we speak to our buyers about all the time, is about in those cases where there are 100 of them in the building, the little things are the big things. So if you are able to find the apartment that has the study nook, the additional courtyard space, those little things become the big things. You are now the point of difference. You're the one of one in that building, and that oversaturation can mean that you're the point of difference then moving forward. That makes for that being a unique purchase, and moving forward, that will always be the unique purchase in that building. So keep that in mind. Okay, if we are doing our homework, so to speak, on a unit purchase, there are things you will want to know about. And you've covered off on a few of them. You've mentioned a few terms in there, but for those that don't have their real estate glossary book with them, a body corporate. What is a body corporate?
They're the people that look after the building on your behalf. Let me rephrase that and be super cynical. They're the people that should look after the building on your behalf. It's like anything. Like there's good childcare providers, there's shit ones. There's good police, there's shit police. There's good buyers and real estate agents, there's shit ones as well. There's really good body corps, and then there are body corps that will take their admin fee, manage a sinking fund, and do the bare minimum. A good way of understanding who's what is to look at how long the current manager's been in place. Have they been there for? Typically, if they've changed it every 2 years, no one's really happy. Things haven't gone well, and there probably hasn't been a great deal of active management. If they've been there longer than 2 years, they're probably doing enough, and if they've been there longer than 5 or 6 years, they're probably doing a good job. I think, their job is to maintain the external
Common areas,
the roof, the party walls, etc. Driveways, garage, in some cases gardens as well. My mum lives in a townhouse complex. Their body corporate is not responsible for gardens, which is super weird. But everyone has this cute little garden that they all maintain, which is great. So yeah, you'll know what those are by reading the sort of body corporate bylaws. That's a document that you don't traditionally get if you're just going out there and making an offer on a unit on the weekend and you get a disclosure statement. So have a look at that, have a read of it. If you've got the ability to pay a solicitor to read that document for you,
worth it.
100% worth it. They will charge you to read and advise on that document. Some of them will just get a copy of it and email it to you and say, hey, read it. You didn't pay me to read it. But that's also, we're going to skip ahead a little bit here, but we talk about how important a good solicitor is in the process. It's fundamentally more important to have a good solicitor if you're buying into a body corporate versus buying a house. Houses are pretty straightforward. They'll do a couple of searches. They'll make sure that that the owner is not going bankrupt. If you haven't had something like a Devello report, they'll see if there's pipes running underneath, whether there's any contaminated soil from the past, if it used to be built on an old petrol station. They'll do all these sort of typical searches. But they won't need to go and look into
the ongoings of a body corporate
Is the
structure.
person who is managing this ongoing, which in a house is you, but in a body corp is the body corporate management, or could be the committee if they don't have an external management. They've agreed to take it on themselves, which in some cases we had clients who bought and sold in Mount Gravatt East. They ran the body corporate for their complex of 4, which was effectively just doing insurance and whippersnippering every now and again because they lived in a bit of a concrete jungle. But someone had to take that over when they moved out. And I actually don't know how that went.
Yeah, for sure. I actually went to a place at Coopero a few months ago, and when we asked about the body corporate, which we do standard before any time we inspect a property, he's like, well, actually, it's the lady next door that just looks after it. It's a bit of a weird setup. Brr, alarm bells are going off. Safe to say we didn't buy that property. And from all accounts, when they did eventually sell it, it was as weird as it sounded.
Interesting. There are probably more common cases of self-managed body corps now. Again, cost of living has affected unit owners as well. And I think coming back to that comment about good body corporate versus less than good body corporate, if you can't justify your existence, you don't get the money. And people are happy to just go, you know what? It is just whippersnippering and home insurance. Why am I paying you all this money for that? Like less than half of my body corporate fee pays for the insurance. And we can get a gardener out every 6 months to do the whippersnipping if we really want to, or I'll go and do it myself. So yeah, expect the unexpected, I think. When you buy into a body corporate, go and see how long they've been active. Call them up. Like we do this as well. We ring body corporate managers and we see how nice they are on the phone, how open they are to giving information, and how willing they are to actually assist the agent and their seller in getting a great price for the property. Because the good ones will give you information. They'll probably not send you anything in writing, but they'll have a conversation with you and then they'll direct you back for your inquiries to go through either the seller or the agent. But that'll give you a sense for how your dealing is going to be in any number of years ongoing. If it's shit at the start, chances are it might be a bit shit ongoing.
For sure. I mean, as a bit of a high level checklist for any potential unit buyer, you want to be asking about body corporate fees. That's the reality of what your quarterly outgoings are going to be for that property. You want to have an idea of what the sinking fund balance currently is. If you're able to get a proposed budget, this can come in the form of both disclosure statement and copy of the last 2 AGM minutes. If you're able to get those things provided, you can get a fairly good sense for what's happening with that complex. You can make a judgment call on that, or you can still elect to, like you said with a good solicitor, put a body corporate search clause on a potential offer. Again, those take a little bit of time. And when we talk about making really tight, easy to accept offers, sometimes there has to be a judgment call as to whether you've got enough information based on disclosure statements, AGM minutes, and potentially a phone call to the body corporate to ask a few questions, whether you can proceed confidently.
I agree with you entirely. Like I think the comment on having a full body corporate search to your satisfaction on a contract when buying a unit, if we can get away with it, and coming back to what we said at the top of the show, buying any apartment in Brisbane at the moment, and I think this will continue well into 2025, so hopefully this conversation doesn't date. It is tough. It is competitive. There are more buyers sub $1 million for an apartment and way more again, sub 700,000 than there are for houses right now, just because of the affordability and because, as we've talked about on this show in the past, Brisbane is growing up a little bit. It's not always possible to have that subject to body corporate search as a special condition on a contract. We will always put it on there and try it on because it just gives everybody a bit of protection. It will give you not just the last 2 AGMs, but it'll give you every piece of paperwork. It's like
every invoice, every
cases,
quote.
It's a 600 or 700 page document. And now you understand why solicitors like, I'm not reading that unless you're paying me. Fair enough, right? We've read them and we get paid at the end, hopefully. But it just tells you everything. It doesn't give you a sense for what it is. It gives you the reality for what it is. In a super competitive market, you might have to just make an offer with a body corporate disclosure statement. You'll know, like, again, you'll have to make a judgment call on that. If you can't get that clause in there, get copies of the AGM. The last 2 tells you a story for the last 2.5 years of that property. If it's boring, it's probably okay. Not a lot major can be deferred for any longer than really 2 years. Like if you need a new roof, your roof's probably not going to collapse in the next 12 months. But the 12 months after that, there would be persistent problems. And in that AGM, and usually if there were any special meetings caused, they'd be recorded in there as well. If there were leaks in the roof or stuff like that, it would show up. And then you could make a judgment call. So best practice, you have to have a disclosure statement. You have to cite it. You have to sign it to make an offer to buy the property. Ideally, before you've done that, you've seen a copy of the last 2 AGMs. You've read them. You've fallen asleep reading them. And that's given you the confidence that actually it's pretty well run. And it might be somewhere that you think you could go and live. On top of that, try and get that subject clause in there. We'll put in the show notes what that clause actually looks like, so you can just open up Spotify or Apple and copy and paste it if you want to as well. I think that'll probably help a lot of people out there. But expect a bit of pushback because it is a get out of jail free card for you.
And they take a while.
They take 2 weeks minimum.
You're not offering a 3-day body corporate search clause. You're offering a 14-day.
Yeah, as an absolute minimum. A good lawyer will tell you that you want 3 weeks. Because they don't actually have a great deal of control over when all of that documentation come back, because some body corporates are good, some of them are average, and they've got to go and organize all that paperwork. And now in an ideal world, they'd have a cloud drive for that building and they would just go download all documents, send. We do not live in an ideal world. And while there's some cool stuff in real estate, things still take way longer than they should.
Sure. This has been a tough podcast for roofs. Hey, like we've really come after the roofs.
We're recording this the day after there was 97 mil of rain where I live in an hour, and I live on a hill and my house flooded. So lame.
Look out. One thing I will point out as a bit of a tip for unit buyers, and this is probably a lot of common sense, as a lot of stuff is in real estate. But when you're buying units, particularly in a complex with any number of apartments in it, using the most recent sale in the complex is a fantastic way to determine value for that particular unit that you're looking at. And as we always say, find out what that last sale was, the last 2 sales were, and contact those agents. Hopefully it's a different agent to the one that's currently listing the one that is for sale. And get an idea as to how they differed, why they got the price that they got. Was it tenanted? Did it have the study nook? Did it have the extra courtyard? Was the body corporate fees different at that point in time? Anything that you can do to then justify value in the property that you're interested in is all power to you.
We had this exact conversation with a new potential client last night. He's a fan of the show. Shout out. They want to buy the unit that they live in Greenslopes. The last sale in that complex was from August was the sale date. October was the settlement date. Sold for 680 grand. It was a 2-bed, 1-bath, fully renovated on the first floor. They've got an unrenovated 2-bed, 1-bath on the second floor, probably with a better aspect. The seller of their place, well, the landlord where they live is using that as his comparable. And it is, the cliche throwaway line would be, we have half the unit that one was. But realistically, theirs is probably worth anywhere between 10 to 20% less, given that would be the cost of the work, even though they have a better view, better aspect, probably better light and better breezes as well. But it's what everyone will look at. And it's what, when I imagine this seller is looking at his RP data report to try and understand, what does the computer think my house is worth? That renovated sale, the computer does not know that sale was renovated.
For sure.
It just knows that it is the same building and the same number of bedrooms and the same number of bathrooms and the same car space. So this one probably should be worth the same, when the reality is vastly different. And that is why don't just look at the numbers and the dates. Make those phone calls. Have the conversation with the agent. Just be like, what would this one in this building sell for if it didn't have that work done? Or this one has the work done. How would that compare to this? What do you reckon that work would have cost? How's the market move? What's the last 2-bed, 1-bath you sold away from that building? And did you have as many offers now as you did 3 months ago, 4 months ago, whatever it might be? Context is everything. And I know that's like we say that a lot, but it is. It's one thing to look at a headline of the news. It's another to read the article. It's exactly the same when you're trying to understand property values. The price is the headline. The article is the phone call to the agent, trying to figure out with them, what is the story behind that price? How did they get there? And how is that relevant to me now?
Yeah, for sure. There's a reason why when you see a comparable sales report, speaking of CoreLogic, that it has a notes section, a comments section. It's because you need to actually put that context in there, put the notes in there, understand what those notes are, and they're called comparable sales because they need to be compared. And the comparison is that not all are the same. So keep that in mind moving forward when you're trying to build value in a unit. We'll put a few notes in the comment in our notes section
For sure.
about clauses and whatnot. And if anyone does need a glossary of real estate terms, maybe we can drum one of those up too. Hey Sam, I'm Chase. Cue the song.